I'm a Jew from Kentucky, that's what I am. The good Lord foresaw it with his infinite plan.
Welcome to the Bluegrass Schmooze. I'm Rabbi Ben Fried.
And I'm Rabbi Shani Abramowitz. On this episode, we'll learn about Adar II, a month we only have in leap years. This month includes the holiday of Purim, a perfect time to raise a glass of bourbon.
So we invited the Bourbon Rabbi, Rabbi Chaim Litvin, to join us this month. He's going to tell us about his work making sure bourbon is kosher.
That's all coming up on the Bluegrass Schmooze.
Forever a Jew with Kentucky, my home.
This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members only pay a $25 copay or less. No insurance, no problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
Welcome back to the Bluegrass Schmooze.
All right, so this month we are going to be talking about Adar Bet, Adar II, Adar Sheni.
Double the Adar, double the fun.
Lots of names for this month. But most importantly, in Adar Bet, in the second month of Adar, we celebrate the holiday of Purim. And we're going to jump in and tell the story of Purim in a bit more detail because it's worth telling.
Absolutely.
So we find ourselves in the Persian Empire.
Oh, it's a good empire.
King Ahasuerus is hosting a party, and he requests that his wife, Queen Vashti, come downstairs and parade before all of the guests. And there are different interpretations about what was exactly being asked of her. Some commentaries say that the king was asking her actually to come downstairs and show her body, right? Sort of strip.
Parading in her proverbial birthday suit.
Yes, exactly. And she says no.
Good for her.
She says, I'm not going to come down. I'm not going to, I don't know these people. How dare you ask me to do that? That is disgraceful. And so she is exiled.
Just as a side note, I think Vashti is a really amazing, fascinating character. Yes. The later rabbis, because they're also men who want to control women, often really vilify her, like the rabbis in the Middle Ages who are commenting on this. But I always thought that the website Jezebel, which I know recently was closed and then maybe is coming back, we hope, it's a wonderful publication. I always thought Vashti would have been a more appropriate name because Jezebel's an actually evil character in the Bible. She is a queen who throws people out of windows and really is just not a nice person. Yeah. Whereas Vashti was standing up for her right as a woman to not have to show off her body to a bunch of men. Right. So big Vashti fan here. But so what happens after Vashti is exiled, is sent away, is how on earth will King Ahasuerus choose a new queen? Let's have a beauty pageant. Yeah. So they call a beauty contest for the whole realm. And one of these young women who enters the beauty contest is a woman by the name of Hadassah, is her Hebrew name, but you probably know her as Esther. She's got a whole book in the Bible. The whole holiday kind of revolves around her. And so she enters this beauty contest. And when the time comes for her to go before the king, he selects her as his new wife. But he doesn't know something about her because she goes before him as Esther, a Persian name, because her uncle, Mordecai, who's also one of the main characters of this story, told her to hide her Jewishness, that she was going and they didn't want everyone to know that she was Jewish. And so she hid her Jewishness when she entered the contest. And so the king selects her as the new queen of the realm without knowing that she herself is in fact Jewish.
So Esther becomes queen, and not long after, it becomes clear that one of Achashverosh's viziers,
Henchmen.
advisors, yes, Haman,
Boo! Rabble.
is plotting to
Why did we just do that, for the record?
plotting to kill the Jews. And when we read in synagogue, when we read the story of Esther, the scroll of Esther, Megillat Esther, anytime Haman's name is mentioned, we boo. We have these things called groggers, which are noisemakers, and we want to sort of blot out his name. So it becomes very raucous. And actually, at times when we're trying to read the Megillah, people go on so long that we have to say, okay, we've booed enough. We got to continue with the reading.
We made a big sign in our synagogue that's like green on one side and red on the other to like tell people when they can go and stop with the booing, because it's so much.
We should do that. So Esther becomes queen, and it becomes clear that Haman, one of Achashverosh's viziers or advisors, wants to kill the Jews. And the reason that Haman wants to annihilate the Jews is because he wants everyone in the kingdom to bow down to him, to pay him a certain level of respect. And Mordecai refuses to bow down. And so he says, not just Mordecai, but I'm going to kill all of the Jews. They don't show me the proper respect that I deserve. And so the fury of Haman is taken out on the Jewish community, the Jewish population of Persia.
Yeah, and Mordecai, who you might remember if you've been paying close attention, is Esther's uncle. Haman said, why won't you bow down to me? And Mordecai said, I only bow down to God. I don't bow down to people. That's kind of this Jewish concept that we don't bow to people. The only one who deserves to be bowed down to is God. And so because of that, right, Haman gets really mad and he casts lots, which in Hebrew are Purim. So the name of the holiday actually comes from the lots that he cast to decide on what date should we kill all the Jews. And they came up with the 14th of the month of Adar. And so he goes to Achashverosh, he goes to the king and says, King, there's this people who are they don't follow the same rules as everyone else. They don't bow down the same way everyone else does. They think of themselves as different and apart. And really, we should kill them all. And if you let me kill them all, I'll give you a bunch of silver. And King Achashverosh, who in the story is depicted as this kind of like bumbling, foolish. Imagine like the king in Aladdin, like Jasmine's dad. Like that's kind of the vibe of Achashverosh. He's just like, he's happy, he's chill, he likes eating and drinking, and that's him. And so he says, okay, because he trusts Haman. Haman is one of his trusted advisors, and he's going to get a bunch of silver. So like, sure, why not? And so all of the Jews then hear about this because it's proclaimed all throughout the land that on the 14th of Adar, everyone is allowed to go and kill their local Jews. And as you might imagine, the Jews take this pretty hard.
And so what starts to happen is that the Jews of Persia start to fast. They start to wear sackcloth, which are traditional, garb of mourning, as a way to sort of petition God to sort of offset this evil decree. Sort of simultaneously to all of this happening, Mordecai is sitting outside the palace gates, sort of publicly mourning, publicly lamenting this death sentence for the Jews, when he overhears two other people who work in the king's palace, Bigtan and Seresh, who are plotting themselves to kill King Achashverosh. They're talking about a plot to poison the king. And Mordecai is able to communicate to Achashverosh that he overheard this plan, and the king has it recorded in his official record. Mordecai the Jew saved my life by giving me this report.
Yeah, and so even in the midst of all of this, possibly the Jews are all going to die, it's not good, we have this report. And then one night, the king is unable to sleep, and instead of counting sheep or, any other thing, he says, read to me from my official record. And they do, and he remembers that, oh yeah, I never did anything nice for that Mordecai guy who saved my life. And so he calls in Haman, his grand vizier, and he says, hey, Haman, and this is like a beautiful moment of dramatic irony. I think that we don't often appreciate the Bible in its storytelling. And this is just a beautiful moment of irony where Haman comes in and the king says to him, "What should I do for someone who I want to honor?" And Haman's like, well, who else could he be talking about besides me? So obviously the king should have a very important person get the king's horse and the king's clothes and have this very important person parade the person around on the king's horse and say, "Here is a person who the king loves." And so Achashverosh says, "Great, that's an awesome idea. I want you to go do that for Mordechai."
The whole story of Purim is about, we'll talk about this maybe a little bit more at the end, but is all about these sort of ironic reversals of fate.
Absolutely.
And people sort of getting caught in their own lie or their own wickedness. And then there's a moment where, Esther she sort of knows behind the scenes everything that's going on. And it becomes clear to Esther and to Mordechai that, Esther's in a position of power to reveal her Jewish identity and hopefully save the Jews of Persia, especially now that Achashverosh is feeling more sympathetic toward Mordechai. And there's a beautiful line in the story at this particular moment that I think about all the time. Esther is feeling very anxious. It still could be very risky to reveal her Jewish identity. We have no idea, no way of knowing how that would play out. And Mordechai says, "It's for this exact moment that you were born." And I actually have chills just saying that out loud. It's so powerful. And it's such a powerful reminder to each of us that, especially when it comes to our identities and who we are, that we almost have this God-given imperative to be honest about who we are, and to stand up and be really proud about who we are, even if it's a risk. But of course, absolutely, in a situation like Esther's, if it means potentially saving your people and the community.
But Esther still has to make this reveal, and she has to figure out how to do it. So she goes before the king, and Achashverosh says, "Oh, my queen, Esther, great to see you." He's feeling overwhelmed with love for her, and he says, "What up to half my kingdom, ask me for it, and you can have it." And she says, "All I want to do is throw a nice feast, a nice dinner party for you and Haman." And Achashverosh is like, "Great, I love dinner parties. That's my favorite thing to do is eat and drink." They go to the party, and the king, again, is feeling great. He's, a little liquored up. He says, "Esther, what can I do for you? Half my kingdom, and it's yours." And she says, "Come to another party." She really wants him to, be in a really, really good mood for this. So they come back for the second party, and it's Haman and Achashverosh and Esther, these three main characters, all together at this dinner party. And that's when Esther decides to make her big reveal. So she says that someone is trying to kill my people. And Achashverosh is like, "Who would try to kill my queen?" Mm-hmm. And she's like, "It's that evil Haman over there." And then Achashverosh is so mad, he storms out. He's standing on the balcony. And Haman, right, he's a little drunk. He tries to go over and plead for his life from Esther and ends up kind of falling on top of her. That doesn't look good when Achashverosh comes back in the room. So Haman literally hoisted on his own petard, is literally hung on the gallows that he had built to hang Mordechai when they, got the green light to kill all the Jews.
Right. And at the very end of the story, the final chapter of the book of Esther, we're actually given a practical guide for how we observe this holiday today. And there are a couple important mitzvot, commandments or rituals that go along with observing the holiday of Purim. The first one is that we read the story of Esther. We read the story that we just told from a scroll. And it's written, and of course we boo when we read Haman's name, and it's 10 chapters long. We have a festive meal. We have a feast, of course.
Gotta have the feast.
We are also commanded to give matanot le'evyonim, which are gifts of charity to people in the community who are in need. And also we give what are called mishloach manot, which are festive gift baskets to people in the community. And then we also, this is not, required in a Jewish legal sense, but we also have the tradition to dress up in costume because so much of the book of Esther is all about hiding and revealing one's true identity. And the sort of rabbinic thinking, rabbinic philosophy around the tradition of dressing up is that, when you are in costume, you actually have the potential to lower your inhibitions, to be a little bit more free in who you are. And even though we're playing dress up and we're being playful about these different identities that we're taking on, it's a way for us to sort of tap into our truest essence.
And speaking of lowering inhibitions, another tradition on the holiday of Purim is also to imbibe, to drink. This is, I will note, a difficult holiday for Jews who are in recovery, for people who are who have histories with alcoholism. But there is this long tradition of drinking a lot on Purim, because both the drinking and the costumes, in addition to revealing the secrets and to opening up the vulnerability, it's also this idea of like topsy-turviness, that in Hebrew called vinafochu, that it all turned upside down. Like, the world turned upside down. A little Hamilton there for you. But this idea that what everyone thought was going to happen, the opposite happened. Mm-hmm. And so everything becomes topsy-turvy. And there's a rabbinic dictum that should not be done unless you are in, all of the proper ways that you can be taken care of and all of that, but that you're supposed to drink until you can't tell the difference between Mordechai and Haman. Now, should one actually do that? Probably not. There's a great story in the Talmud of these two rabbis who were celebrating Purim together. One of them was Rabbi Zera. I don't remember who the other one was. But they get so drunk that night that Rabbi Zera literally takes a sword and cuts the other one's head off. He then wakes up in the morning and realizes what he's done and prays so hard that the man's head reattaches to his body and he's able to keep living. And then the best part of the story is the next year, Rabbi Zera's like, hey, do you want to come celebrate Purim with me? And the guy's like, absolutely not. He says, I am not going to rely on a miracle happening again. I've seen what you get like on Purim. And so I'm going to take a hard pass on that one. The Talmud is great.
The Talmud is great. We'll have an episode on the Talmud one day.
Absolutely.
If you happen to find yourself in Israel for Purim, the whole country it sort of shuts down so people can celebrate the holiday. And you'll see people walking all over the streets of all the cities in Israel in pretty elaborate costumes. And it's just a day of sort of public fun and drunkenness and celebration.
Yeah, if you think your neighborhood does Halloween pretty hard and people it's got nothing on Purim in Israel.
Nope.
It is just massive parties everywhere in public. Everyone is in costume. It is just a national day of dressing up and of fun and of revelry. And it's really it is really very, very fun. Yeah. There's also this interesting thing though that I'd love to go back to in the book of Esther. It is one of very, very few, perhaps the only. I'm not totally sure. I probably should know this. But that God's name does not appear at all in the book of Esther. That usually in Judaism, when we are so happy that things worked out the way that they did, we're like, oh my gosh, thank God, right? God, that's so great that you did that. But in the entire book of Esther, God's name does not appear. And the rabbis really noticed this. And they're like, wait, could it be that God was absent? God was hidden, during this time? Or, is it that, we have to rely on ourselves, that we can't only rely on God? And there's this really interesting, rabbinic discussion of God's presence even in God's absence. So, what does it mean to believe in God even when God doesn't feel imminently present?
Mm-hmm. Right. And there are a couple moments in the story itself, in the text, when the word hamelech is used, king, which, if you're reading the text on the surface level, you think, oh, of course, this is referring to King Achashverosh, one of the main characters of the story. But Hamelech is also, or Melech, king, is also another name for God.
Yeah.
So there are these sort of surreptitious ways that the divine figure shows up throughout the story.
Yeah. And I think it's really instructive for us in our lives of that, we live in a day and age in which some people are able to really walk around the world and look and see God imminently in the world. And for other people, it's much harder. And I think that the reminder that even when we can't see God, when God isn't so evident, when God isn't, right there in front of our faces in full name and, regalia, as it were, that God is still very much present, whether you believe that God is present in the actions of others. I love one of my favorite non-Jewish ordained people is Mr. Rogers, who's a Methodist pastor. And he said that when he was little and he would ask his mom, where God was, that when bad things happened, that God was in the helpers. Look to the helpers, that God is in the helpers. And so there's sort of a message like that here in the book of Esther, that, where is God? God is in Mordecai, and God is in Esther, and God is in, all of the people who did the things that made it so that the Jews were able to live and survive and eat our feasts and give our presents and do all those things. So I think it's a really important and good reminder that we can see God in all sorts of different ways in the world, right. And that God is not necessarily, man in the sky with a long white beard, but that God shows up and impacts the story even back in biblical times in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, beautiful. And just to add to that I think it's also a reminder that as human beings, we obviously don't operate like God, but we have agency and responsibility in the world.
Yeah.
There's a Hasidic idea called hishtadlut or hishtadlus, which basically translates to doing your part, right? So you do your part, you do your work, and God will meet you halfway and help you with the rest. And the example that I was always given growing up to describe sort of what hishtadlus is that no matter how faithful you are, no matter how much you believe in God and God's ability to, perform miracles in the world, you would never cross a busy street with your eyes closed. You would stand on the curb, you would look both ways, and you would make sure that it was safe for you to cross. Because if you don't take responsibility for yourself and your behavior, in the way you, in this case, literally walk through the world, it changes the way that God functions in the world. And we have this sort of imperative to be partners with God in the miracles that God can perform. And so there's so much agency in the story of Esther and Purim. And like you said, the helpers, it's the people who do. It's the people who take responsibility for what's happening around them to sort of change the course of things.
Yeah. My metaphor for hishtadlus is a little different, but there's a joke about a guy who stands in the back of the services every single week and prays really hard to win the lottery. And he prays, God, just please let me win the lottery. Please let me win the lottery. Every single week. That's all he prays for over and over again. God, I kept kosher. I keep Shabbos. I do all the things. Please just let me win the lottery. After a year of this, he's praying really, really hard. And then he hears a heavenly voice say, Max, buy a darn ticket already. If you're listening to this and it's Rosh Chodesh Adar, it's not too late to find a place to celebrate Purim. Obviously, hopefully contact your local synagogue before you just show up in a scary costume. That would, freak some people out. But people, we love to celebrate Purim. It's a very joyous holiday. The feasting, the gift giving, it's a lot of fun. And we hope that we wish a Purim Sameach. It's a joyous, happy time in the Jewish calendar. And it's really fun.
Chag Purim Sameach.
Chag Purim Sameach.
That's it for this month in Judaism. Stick around after the break to meet Chaim Litvin, the Bourbon Rabbi. You're listening to the Bluegrass Schmooze. Welcome back to the Bluegrass Schmooze. Well, we're in Kentucky, and we love to l'chaim. So, of course, we love our bourbon. But is it kosher? To teach us the ins and outs of kosher certification in the bourbon world, we're joined today by Chaim Litvin.
Rabbi Chaim Litvin was born and raised here in Louisville, Kentucky. He now serves the Jewish community in his hometown with his wife and their 6 children. He serves as a mashgiach, a kosher supervisor for a number of kashrut organizations, and works with a wide variety of food and beverage manufacturers, including a number of bourbon distilleries. He's the owner and CEO of Bourbon Rabbi, and to many is the Bourbon Rabbi, through which he operates tours and tastings as well as bottling his own line of bourbons. He travels to communities worldwide to lead tastings and lectures on bourbons and how Judaism relates to it. Rabbi Litvin also happens to be an Ironman triathlete and a good friend. Rabbi Litvin, welcome to the Schmooze.
Welcome, Rabbi Litvin. So glad to have you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So it's wonderful to schmooze with you. We're going to call you Chaim for now, as we said, because otherwise if we all call each other Rabbi, it can get very confusing. But for a lot of our guests, we ask them for kind of their Jewish bio after their normal bio, but yours are very intertwined, that for you, they go together. So perhaps could you just tell us a bit more what it was like growing up as an Orthodox or a Chabad Jew in Louisville and how, your experience of being Jewish here perhaps differs from other Jews.
So it's hard to put myself in someone else's shoes and know what their background and upbringing was, especially relative to mine. But I can tell you about mine.
Please do.
So I grew up here, went to the local Jewish day school here till I was 10 years old through 5th or 6th grade. A lot of people ask about anti-Semitism and stuff like that. I never experienced anything like that growing up here. Went away to school when I was 10 or 11. I don't know, it's a long time ago now. I was in Pittsburgh for a number of years. Went to Jewish schools and yeshivas all over the world. Got my rabbinic degree in Sydney, Australia. Moved back to America. Had a rabbinical apprenticeship in Richmond, Virginia. The next year, I led a high number of birthright trips. Spent most of my time that wasn't in Israel and in airport lounges. And then got married, moved back to Louisville with my wife and then one daughter. And now we're here with 3 and 3.
And so I guess, this is the podcast, so folks can't see that while, the three of us are all rabbis, you present as Jewish in a little bit of a different way. That you, when people have perhaps, and I mean this in a positive way, stereotypical images of, a rabbi with a beard who wears, a suit and has tzitzit, the fringes hanging out and all those things, that you kind of present as a more visibly obvious Jewish person.
I didn't realize my nose was that big.
But can you tell us more about why that might be? Because there are reasons around that. It's not just, that like why your practice of Judaism, we've had Reform and conservative Jews on and also people who identify just as cultural Jews. You are not only our first rabbi guest on the Shmooze, but our first Orthodox Jewish guest. Could you talk to us a little bit about how your life, it might express itself in some ways through dress, but also just through your day-to-day lived experience? I know you don't want to, comment on others, but how your experience is just as a lived Jew on a day-to-day basis.
So I try to guide my life and kind of practice what I preach, basically. So in the Chabad culture, for lack of a better term, it's very much about helping others do more mitzvot, more of the commandments. So there's 613 commandments listed in the Old Testament, in the 5 books of Moses, and then many of them don't apply. They only apply in Israel during Jewish rule in the temple, etc. But there are many of them that do and can apply, and the purpose that we're here in this world is to build a dwelling place for God on earth, and ultimately to bring about the Messianic era and the revelation of Mashiach. And the way that we believe the way to do that is by doing more and more of the mitzvot, which are connections between man and God. And the more we do, the faster we can get to that end game. So I can do as many as I can, and if I can help somebody else do one, that's one more on that, that Yom Kippur scale, the judge scale. So just trying to put more down on the mitzvah side and trying to weigh that scale in that way. So if presenting a Jew, putting on a yarmulke, wearing that, obviously I'm not trying to say I'm more proud to be Jewish than someone that's not wearing it, but showing that, and I'll actually tell you, we're here on 4th Street, downtown Louisville. About 8 or 9 years ago, the Louisville Jewish School was actually on 4th Street in the Starks building. My father and I and my brother-in-law walked out of the building onto 4th Street, saw someone on the street who hadn't seen people in yarmulkes in a very long time. Mm-hmm. And he actually said, "What is this, a yarmulke convention?" He was actually the head of the tech for 4th Street, and that's actually our connection. How we got to 4th Street, where we have the big menorah lighting there, was because we were 3 guys wearing yarmulkes on 4th Street. So, doing that, it also pushes people to ask questions. They see something different, they ask. Asking is how people learn. If people just have their minds made up and they don't ask and aren't pushed to ask or don't have a reason to ask or they don't see anything out of the norm to ask about, is how bigotry kind of grows and people get stuck in their ways, and then they tell their kids and they tell their kids. And I think it's kind of a way to, or a way in a small way, to kind of change that cycle and show that we are different. It's nothing to be ashamed of. We're proud of it. And if you have questions, come and ask. I'm all about it.
I love that image so much, that story that you just shared about sort of encountering a stranger on the streets of Louisville and what it opened up for him and also for you. And in a place like Kentucky, right, where we're so fortunate to have such a vibrant Jewish community, but it is small. I know this is true in Lexington also, that, when we meet a person on the street who happens to be Jewish, who we've never met before, it's almost like this incredible reunion, revelation of, wow, I didn't know. And it's almost like permission that you're giving to another Jewish person to lean into their Jewish identity a little bit more publicly and visibly. And in a place where there aren't so many of us and not so many visibly Jewish people, what a gift that is. And so I'm so curious, did you always know that you were going to come back to Kentucky, teaching and learning and traveling and getting your ordination, your smicha, so far away in Australia? Was it always sort of your plan to come back to the Bluegrass State?
It was never ruled out. I grew up here. I always loved Louisville. It's, where my family was. My sister, my younger sister, had moved back with her husband. She got married before me. She was already living here. My parents were here. I had a brother, older brother that was living in New Jersey at the time. And I was kind of figuring my way, got married. My wife had a great job in New York in the Diamond District. I had a job in Brooklyn with a media company. We had our first kid, and we're kind of, making those decisions on where we wanted to raise her. And there was a incident in our apartment building. And very quickly we made the decision that isn't where we wanted to raise our family. And within about 72 hours of that event, we owned a home in Louisville.
Wow. And so you were at a media company before. You had done different rabbinic things. How did the kashrut thing come about? How did that become a focus? Because as I understand it, the kashrut led to the bourbon rather than the other, or was it the other way around?
No, that's correct. So my father was involved in kosher for now 40-ish years. Growing up, when I would come back to town, I would assist in that. I always liked the technical side, not just the rabbinic side of what needs to happen, but the machinery and all of those things. I mean, I certify 2% of the world's popcorn is made in southern Indiana, and I do the kosher certification for that. And the machines that are involved in that are fascinating. So, from the food side, from the distillery side, I mean, if you go to any distillery, but especially the big ones, Heaven Hill is one of the ones that I certify. Seeing all those machineries, the bottling machines are really, really cool. Just the way the cookers, the fermentation, distillation works, all of those things are fascinating to me. So I really enjoyed that. And then figuring out, so they have their system of how all of those things work. And then how would something become non-kosher? And then how would you kosherize, for lack of a better term, that equipment safely? Because kosherization is almost always with heat. So we're, either boiling water, or high temperatures, high pressure, and trying to figure all that out is just something I really enjoyed.
So that's such a perfect segue. Tell us a little bit about, what makes bourbon kosher, and also what are the things that could potentially make bourbon not kosher?
So the process of making bourbon is a kosher process. It's made out of grains, water, yeast. It'd be pretty hard to, if you were, don't do this at home because it's illegal, but if you were going to make bourbon at home, it'd be difficult to get non-kosher involved in it. It's a kosher process. The majority of problems, use the word problem, but issues from a kosher standpoint that occur in the bourbon world usually are after the liquid leaves the barrel. So the cooker, just for those that aren't familiar, the process of making bourbon, super simplified, is you cook up your grains. They're usually smashed grains. It's going to be, for bourbon specifically, it's 51% corn or more. Usually then you have rye and barley, sometimes wheat, sometimes other grains. But you smash up those grains, you cook them a couple hours, move them over, and let them ferment. You add your yeast, sits there for 3 to 5 days, maybe 7, depends on the distillery, depends on temperature, depends on a bunch of things. I'm skipping over a whole bunch of technical stuff, cooling and keeping temperatures. But all that aside, the next step in the process after that yeast so the process of fermentation is the yeast attacks the sugars, creates CO2 and alcohol. We then want to distill that. Distillation is the evaporation of the alcohols. So you heat up your still to around 180. Water evaporates at 212. Alcohol evaporates at 180. So the water and the solids will fall. The alcohols will evaporate. You recondense that gas back into liquid, and that's your hard alcohol, 180 or so proof. So that's a quick overview of
that was good. That was very impressive.
Al regalachas, right?
Yeah.
So on one leg, in one breath, that's distillation.
Wow.
That's how you make vodka. If you want to make whiskey, you put that distillate into a barrel. So at that point, it's really hard to mess that up, for lack of a better term. In a small distillery that's just making bourbon, take Maker's Mark, for example. There's no finish. There's none of those other things that happen in some of the bigger distilleries. It'd be much harder for them to make that non-kosher.
And as we know here in Kentucky, the bourbon has to be a new charred oak barrel. So there's no problem. It's a new barrel, never been used, and it's been burnt on the inside.
Correct. The issue, though, becomes in these larger distilleries, or even some of the smaller ones, are doing a lot of other things besides straight bourbons. So once you introduce wines and cordials and flavored items and bourbon creams, so now you have a dairy issue. So, if you have a dairy product, you can't have that with a meat meal on Shabbat or something like that. Some of the flavors may not be kosher. So then you run into cross-contamination between equipment and bottling lines and storage tanks and all of that, which is where the majority of the kosher concerns come from. You also have issues with moving. So if you have, some of these bigger facilities, Heaven Hill, for example, has multiple places. Brown Foreman has, a whole bunch of different facilities. Four Roses. A lot of these companies have multiple plants, and then moving product from one to the other. Is the truck that it went in kosher? What was in that tank last? All that movement. So smaller places, more contained, only making bourbon, much less space for issue. But the bigger they get, the more globalized, for lack of a better term, the companies are, the more place there is for kosher concern.
Can you walk us through, when you arrive at a distillery, what does the process look like from start to finish?
So again, that would depend on the plant and gets very, very specific and technical, but just on a very basic level, somewhat a place that is just making bourbon that doesn't have any flavors, there's no ingredients in their entire facility that aren't kosher, it's much easier. Much less oversight is needed, and a place that has thousands of SKUs and tens of thousands of ingredients, it can get a lot more complicated. Sometimes you have to switch out suppliers, to get a flavor from a kosher place or a certified place instead of a non-certified place. Sometimes recipes have to be altered, but it really depends. It's very, very case specific, and usually the smaller and the closer they are to just straight whiskeys, the less would have to change, and protocols, the fewer protocols would have to be put in place.
So this month we're recording this in Adar Rishon, but we're about to start Adar Sheni, the second Adar, which is this episode's month, and in Adar Sheni we have the holiday of Purim, and we talked a little bit in this month in Judaism in the first segment about Purim. But for you as the Bourbon Rabbi, there's a special connection there. Can you tell us a little bit from your angle this connection between Purim and alcohol in general, and perhaps hear a little bit about bourbon and how that all connects for you?
Well, the way it connects for me is sales. So yeah, I mean, historically, Purim is a good month. Sages say, it's a good time for court cases, for surgeries, for things that are risky. It's a good, positive month. It's a time we should, try to schedule those things. What's interesting is that when Haman was deciding when to try to kill all the Jews, he chose Adar because it's the month that Moses died in.
Mm-hmm.
What he didn't realize is that the anniversary of his death was also his birthday. It was both the 7th. It was 20 days ago, and from the day of recording, and so it was a good, positive day, and a day, a miraculous month, and the Jews were saved, and things turned from looking very dire to very positive, which I'm sure you covered in the last episode. And then, moving towards today, the sages say we want to get to a point where you can't tell the difference between Haman, the villain in the story of Purim, and Mordechai, the hero. And Bourbon Rabbi is a great way to get there responsibly.
Of course. Don't drive if you can't tell the difference between Haman and Mordechai, please.
If you can tell there's a red light and a green light, stay off the roads.
And just to do a little plug for Purim in Lexington, we always have mocktails available for, people under 21 and also anyone who doesn't want to actually imbibe alcohol, but can still enjoy the festivities and the fun of drinking a special Purim-related cocktail. So right now we're in Purim mode, but it's hard to believe, exactly a month after Purim, we celebrate Pesach, we celebrate Passover. And one of the central prohibition of Pesach is to not eat products made of grain or wheat products. And how do you deal with that? It seems like your business as a Bourbon Rabbi, your passion sort of becomes off limits during Passover, during the week of Pesach. And what do you think about that? How do you deal with it? And what does that look like for you work-wise and professionally?
Well, back to the sales thing. It's a little slow that week. But no, I mean, it's the way that it is. And I think it's a good thing. It kind of shows that if you look at it just from an alcohol standpoint, if you can't make it 7 days without alcohol, see somebody. If you're enjoying it, please enjoy mine. But if you're, relying on it to get through your day, that's a tough spot to be in. I don't wish that on anyone. So yeah, I mean, I see it. All, Shabbos and holidays are always a great time to spend with family and kind of set everything else aside. And it kind of forces me to do that. We, as a family, we usually go away that time. Last year we went to Cumberland Falls. It's a nice time to just get away. You can't work. I can't. I mean, my business has to be closed. Actually, sell the entire company for the week. So I got nothing to do with it, and it's great.
So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because one of the things about Passover is not only can you not drink or eat the grains, but you can't own them. And so you own a lot of barrels of bourbon that you, do yourself. And we have some bourbon companies that you work with that are owned by Jews. And for them to get kosher certification, my understanding is they also are not allowed to own their companies for that week. So what does that look like?
So there's something called a mechiras chametz, or a sale of chametz. This has been done for hundreds of years now. It actually, interestingly, dates back when this became something that many, many people did, actually dates back to distilleries in Eastern Europe. So back in the day, Jews weren't allowed to own land. The landowners, or the parets, would assign often Jews to run the krechmes, or the inns, and those inns all had bars. It was a pretty integrated system where the Jewish guy who was appointed to run the bar would have a friend make the alcohol on the side, and they had this integrated system where they were able to supply the Cossacks with their nightly cap. The problem was that every year Passover would come without fail, and they'd have to start again from scratch. They'd have to throw everything out and start again. And that's really when the sale of chametz really took a turn and became like the norm that everybody did. Really came from that. So fast forward to today, distilleries owned by Jews are doing that as well, where you actually sell all of the grain, all the chametz materials, and don't own it. There are many distilleries that are doing this, that are owned by Jews, and it's pretty common practice.
So I happen to have been over at your father's house last year at the end of Passover, and I remember I think that it was your younger brother was the one who had been the witness or the person who was doing the sale, and so it was right at the end of Passover, and they were like, yeah, there's like $2 billion worth of chametz of leavening that we have to make sure that we uneffectuate the sale to make sure that it goes back into its proper hands. And he was like, oh my God, I'm responsible for $2 billion worth of whiskey right now.
At least.
So one of my favorite things about your Bourbon Rabbi whiskey is when you use gematria with the proofs. Now, some folks who are listening don't know what proof means, and some people don't know what gematria means. So, could you first walk us through what is a whiskey's proof? When people see on a whiskey bottle, it's 80 proof or it's 120 proof. What does that mean? And then we'll get to the gematria stuff.
All right. So, proof, in simple terms, is twice alcohol percentage. The way that kind of came into effect was at the end of Prohibition, people were adding all kinds of things to whiskey. There was very little whiskey available on the market. They were adding tobacco juice to make it darker. They were adding some of the bad ethanols to the alcohol to have more of it in order, to kind of spread it thinner. And people were getting sick. And so that's actually where we're in the bottled and bond time of year. For those that are aware, we're not going to get too much into that. But so bottled and bond is actually a term you may have seen on a bottle. Actually was kind of like a kosher supervision from a government standpoint, where the government came in, as they do, and enacted these rules and regulations. They held the barrels under lock and key, and they guaranteed that everything in that bottle was at least 4 years old, was 100 proof. We'll get to that in a minute. Was from one distillery, one distilling season. They had all these rules that guided it. So proof was 100 proof was the minimum, was like that standard. If you pour 100 proof, which is 50% alcohol, on gunpowder and try to light it, it will ignite. If you go below that 50% or that 100 proof, it will not. There'll be too much water there, which will put out the flame. So the proof that it was 100 was that it would light. So that became the 100 proof. And so, proof is now just basically means twice alcohol percentage.
Great. So then you use proofs for because you bought people. All whiskeys can bottle it. Well, if it's specifically bourbon, it has to be in a specific range of proofs. I know, but 80 plus. But you can bottle it different proofs. You connect your proofs to Jewish text. Can you tell us how that works?
So gematria is the numerological value of letters to numbers. So in Hebrew, if Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, you can get all the way up to 10, and then you go to 20, 30, 40, all the way to 100, then 100, 200, 300, 400, you run out of letters. And then you can, with those letters, you can put them together and you can build any number you want. For those that didn't understand those Hebrew letters, for our listeners that aren't familiar with the alphabet, if A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, you can get all the way up to 10, etc.
So it's like Roman numerals, but instead of using random numbers, it goes in the order of the alphabet.
Kind of, but not really in a way.
Okay.
Maybe. The Roman numeral basically has like 5 letters that they use altogether. We use 26.
True.
And they have like principal numbers and then add and subtract. But basically, it's another way of calculating letters to numbers. So the word chazak, which we say as we complete each of the 5 books of Moses in the synagogue, chazak v'nes chazek is empowering strength. Give us strength, let us be strengthened. So chazak is that empowering of strength, and the equivalent of that word, it's a 3-letter word. The first letter is chet, is worth 8. The second is zayin, which is worth 7. The third is the kuf, which is worth 100. 5, 7, 100. For those that aren't familiar, 115. And we went with 115 proof on the flagship bourbon, the first bourbon that we put out, as a message of strength, of empowering. When we're drinking, it should obviously be responsibly and for good things, empowering strength to others. It should never, be, negative and as a, something that's putting anybody down. The other gematria that we use, we put out a bourbon last year, right before Purim, is a bourbon aged in Cabernet Sauvignon barrels. Those barrels are from a kosher winery called Shira Winery in California, an award-winning winery. And that proof is 98, which is the gematria of the word l'chaim.
Ah, nice. Well, I hope you were. Well, I guess it'd be impossible, but you can't make one with like sameach, because that'd be
a little high.
It'd be a little high.
You use the mispar katan.
So that's perfect because at the end of each episode, we do a special l'chaim of the month. So now we have a new cool fun fact to bring with us into that l'chaim. So what is on the horizon for the Bourbon Rabbi? What exciting things do you have coming down the literal or proverbial pipeline, as it were?
Oh, we have 2 products coming out very soon.
Oh.
This is the first public display of it.
You heard it first on the schmooze, folks.
A cinnamon aged whiskey.
Ooh.
As well as a tequila Aneo aged in Bourbon Rabbi barrels.
Wow. Is it still going to use the Bourbon Rabbi label, or do you have a tequila Rabbi label you've been working on?
No, it'll still be the Bourbon Rabbi label, but it'll be an Aneo tequila. I have the label here on my phone. I can show you. The label's already been approved by the feds. Every label on a bottle has to be approved by the TTB, which is the Tax and Trade Bureau, which is a federal organization. Just from a history standpoint, it used to be the ATF. After 9/11, the ATF did terrorism and firearms, and the TTB was created to govern alcohol and tobacco, and probably eventually marijuana.
All right.
Wow.
So
Mazal
we are
tov, it's so
excited. Yeah, Mazal tov, excited to taste those. So we will maybe for our l'chaim of the month we'll have to get one of those bottles for next month.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Next month is
not ready yet.
Pesach, so maybe in a couple of months.
Yeah.
Well, tequila.
That's true.
It's aged in bourbon barrels, so it's a problem. But
yeah.
Tequila is a good option for Passover.
Yes, if it's 100% agave.
Agave.
Yeah.
Well, if it's tequila, the other thing used primarily is cane. So obviously, check for kosher supervision.
Check with your local rabbi.
But tequila is an option. I actually my custom, the Chabad custom, is not to drink any hard alcohol the entire week of Passover.
Well, no slivovitz for y'all.
We don't do it at all.
Wow.
Wow. Can you say a little bit more about that? About why?
So that kind of goes back to Eastern Europe when these types of customs were enacted or created or started. So back then, mass manufacturing of anything, foods, beverages, any of that stuff, wasn't really a thing. Everything was kind of made at home. And a lot of the customs around Passover, there's a lot of people don't eat garlic on Passover because back in the day, garlic was dried in the same warehouses as wheat. So they were concerned that there could be cross-contamination. It's not done that way anymore, but the custom started and we don't like to end customs. So there's a lot of things like that. So anything basically not made in the home isn't used with the exception of, so in order to have meat, we're not slaughtering animals in our backyards. Not yet. But, I make whiskey. I don't make wine. So we need wine, obviously, for the Seder. We don't make matzah at home, although we do have a very cool interactive model matzah bakery here in Louisville. And I encourage everybody to check out.
It is very fun.
We've stepped up our game for this year. It's been absolutely incredible.
Exciting.
So there are a lot of things like that people don't consume things that weren't made at home or in the family. Mass-produced things aren't consumed quite as much, and alcohol kind of fell into that category and is not consumed by many.
Wow. Very interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you.
All right, we are going to move into our lightning round. So these are some questions that we ask to all of our guests at the end of an episode. So just quick, off the top of your head, whatever comes to mind first. So favorite Jewish holiday?
Tisha B'Av.
Okay. Should we talk about that? I feel like
I think I need to get unpacked.
Yeah, well, so we have not done the month of Av yet, so many of our listeners will not know that Tisha B'Av is a fast day on which we commemorate the destruction of the temples in Jerusalem and other kind of Jewish tragedies. Do you want to say just a couple of words about why that's your favorite Jewish holiday?
So, one of my positions here in Louisville, aside from Bourbon Rabbi and having the distillery and kosher supervision, is that I do the outreach work for Chabad of Kentucky. I run all of the holiday programming, Purim party. We have a Purim party coming up. Rabbi Ben has been to a couple of those. The matzah break we mentioned earlier, things like that. Tisha B'Av is one of those holidays that we don't have a lot of outreach for, so it's kind of a day off for me. So I can kind of enjoy that. But from a religious aspect, the Tisha B'Av, when Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes, in that era of Revelation, is going to be a very happy, joyous day, and I look forward to it.
Amen.
Amen. All right, honey cake or apples and honey?
Apples and honey.
Strong answer.
Yes.
With Bourbon Rabbi honey.
Best Purim costume you've ever worn?
Wow, that's a tough one. When I was 9, I made a traffic light that I wore, and whenever it was always green until I saw somebody, and then I just turn it red. That was fun. Remember that?
And
No
Ben,
yellow.
Ben, do you know yet what your Purim costume is going to be this year?
I can share that Cantor Horties and I are thinking about doing Barbenheimer instead of Barbenheimer.
Oh, that's funny.
So some like Barbie Heyman crossover action. We don't have it all pulled together yet, but that's the idea. What about you?
Well, our older daughter Elisheva is in a she loves monkeys right now and saying the word monkey. So we're all going to be different jungle animals, and she's going to be a monkey. And Chaim, do you know your costume for this year?
My wife has not told me what it is yet.
TBD.
Although another fun one we did is we were, my wife and I were peanut butter and jelly. So it was a piece of bread with peanut butter, and she was a piece of bread with jelly.
Nice.
Like emoji costumes. So that was fun.
Favorite break fast food, savory or sweet?
Coffee. It's, yeah. Straight, black, no sugar, no milk. Cold.
All right. Favorite biblical character?
I feel after the Tisha B'Av answer, I got to go out of the box on this one. But Samson.
And finally, Hamantaschen or Latka?
No, Latka. Hands down.
Yes. Correct answer.
That has been the consensus of all of our guests. So we conclude each episode, as we said, with a l'chaim of the month. We're recording at 10 o'clock in the morning, so we're just going to do a figurative l'chaim. But your l'chaim of the month is to a person or an organization or anything that you want to give your l'chaim to raise them up, to give them a little airtime, to share some thanks or some gratitude, or just to highlight something or someone who you think is doing important work. So, Shani, do you want to start us off with your l'chaim of the month?
Sure, I'm happy to. So Purim is actually going to be right around the time that I come back to work from maternity leave. And we have, an incredible community of volunteers and lay leaders who have been holding down the fort at our shul at OZS in the 12 weeks that I'll have been gone. And so I want to raise a l'chaim to all of the people, the whole community of OZS and Lexington, who have really lifted up and done a lot of important work in my absence.
L'chaim.
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 Rabbi Chaim?
So it's a very special organization I've come to know of late, kind of unfortunately, called Kav Lenor. They're a mental health organization in Israel. They're dealing with the soldiers, with the victims of October 7th, families from those kibitzing. And they're doing some amazing work, helping a lot of people. So l'chaim to them, and chazak, may they be strengthened, and may they not be needed.
Amen. L'chaim.
Amen.
L'chaim.
And my l'chaim of the month. I had everyone else going. I didn't think of one while y'all were talking. I was so enraptured by your l'chaims. They were wonderful. I am going to give my l'chaim of the month this month to actually the person who I was just talking about, who I will be sharing a Purim costume with, hopefully, to my partner in clergy, Cantor Sharon Hordes. We were just meeting earlier this morning, and we've each signed contract extensions to stay here in Louisville for a while longer. So we were filming a fun video that's kind of like, the high school athletes who do the videos when they commit to a college. So we did that to announce our staying here in Louisville for a while. And she's just a wonderful partner in clergy, and I really love working with her, and am glad that I get to continue to do so for a while longer. So, l'chaim.
L'chaim and mazal tov.
Thank you. And thank you again, Rabbi Litvin, for joining us. It's been a pleasure to schmooze with you.
Thanks for having me. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Litvin, and thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.
That's it for this month's episode of the Bluegrass Schmooze. Join us next month for Nisan, when we unpack Passover.
We'll be talking about leavened bread and the story of the Exodus.
Then we'll schmooze with Yehuda Husband, who will share his story as a Jew of color in Kentucky. That's all coming up next month on the Bluegrass Schmooze. The Bluegrass Schmooze is created and produced by Rabbi Shani Abramowitz and me, Rabbi Ben Fried. Our executive producer is Laura Ellis.
Production assistance from Alex Biscardi. Our opening and closing song is Jew from Kentucky, written by Dan Byrne and performed by Dan Byrne and Bridget Kalin.
Thanks to Knesset Israel Congregation in Louisville and Ohave Zion Synagogue in Lexington for believing in two young rabbis and helping us make this podcast a reality. Our show is made possible by support from the Jewish Heritage Fund. The Bluegrass Schmooze is a part of the Louisville Public Media Podcast Incubator, with support from the Eye Care Institute's Butchertown Clinical Trials.
Find us on Instagram for lots of extra content. We're at Bluegrass Schmooze, or send us an email at schmooze@lpm.org.
To keep in touch and to learn how you can help us continue this work, visit bluegrassschmooze.org.
We're Jews from Kentucky, that's what we are. We drink our mint juleps from a kosher dill jar. Wherever we wander, wherever we roam, Jews from Kentucky is always at home. Everybody.
Support for LPM podcasts comes from the Eye Care Institute and Butchertown Clinical Trials, where they strive for diversity, equity, and inclusion within their staff, patients, and clinical trial participants. To learn more, visit butchertown.clinic.